The appearance of Roman soldiers, their weapons and armor can be reconstructed from archaeological sources. But, not content with the obtained static picture, historians seek to find out how exactly this military equipment was used. Information from historical sources and experiments with modern replicas of ancient equipment have made it possible to present the Roman battle technique with a high degree of probability. What was it like? The Roman legionary of the classical and late Republic era was armed with a sword, shield and 2 darts. When approaching an enemy, legionaries first threw darts at him and then attacked with sword in hand. Roman sword had a long, up to 76 centimeters, and narrow 4 centimeters wide, slightly narrowing in the middle of the blade with an elongated thin point, equally well suited for both stabbing and chopping. This form of blade became widespread after the Second Punic War. In hand-to-hand combat, which usually ended the battle, swords were terrible weapons in the hands of Roman legionaries. The psychological effect that these weapons produced and the wounds they inflicted. Sword training was part of the training of Roman legionaries. How it was conducted is known from the words of the late antique author Vegetius Renatus. The ancients conducted exercises with new recruits in the following manner. They wove from twigs, like a wicker, rounded shields, so that this wicker weighed twice as much as the usual, the state-set shield. In the same way, instead of swords, the recruits were given wooden clubs of double weight. And in this way, not only in the morning, but also in the afternoon, they exercised on wooden scarecrows. Each individual recruit had to drive a separate wooden scarecrow into the ground for himself, so that it would not sway and would be 6 feet high. Against this scarecrow, as if against his real enemy, the recruit exercises with his wattle, and with a club, as if with a sword and shield he then tries to hit him in the head and face, then threatens his sides, then, attacking the shins, tries to cut his hamstrings, retreats, pounces, throws himself on him, as a real enemy, so he does on this scarecrow all kinds of attacks, all the art of warfare. Vegetius specifically stipulates that during the exercises, special attention was paid to the fact that the fighter, striking a blow, did not take aside the arm with a shield and thereby did not open himself to the blow of the enemy. To this end, he says, the Romans endeavored to teach recruits to stab rather than chop. A chopping blow, with whatever force it may fall, is not often fatal, because the vital parts of the body are protected by both arms and bones. On the contrary, in a stabbing blow it is sufficient to thrust the sword in 2 inches for the wound to be fatal, but it is necessary that what is pierced should enter the vital organs. Then, when a chopping blow is delivered, the right arm and right side are exposed. A stabbing blow is delivered with the body covered and wounds the enemy before he has time to notice. That's why in battles the Romans used mainly this method. The same technique, according to Vegetius, was used in the training of fighters in gladiatorial schools. The fighter, who passed their training, was able to fight with equal dexterity as the left and right hand and possessed the most sophisticated fencing techniques. The training of ordinary soldiers was not so sophisticated. However, the consul Publius Rutilius, going to war against the Cimbrians, instructed fencing teachers from the gladiatorial school of Aurelius Scaurus to teach the legionaries more complex techniques of striking and reflecting blows. There are a number of direct indications about the method and technique of Roman fencing in the narrative sources. Telling about the wars that the Romans waged against the Gauls, the Greek historian compares the characteristic manner of fighting of both opponents. The way of fighting adopted by the barbarians was disorderly and unattached to the art of war. In fact, they then raised their swords up and struck, piling their whole body like some woodcutters or diggers, then directed untargeted blows from the side, as if intending to cut together with the armor itself the whole body of the enemy. Then the points of their swords they diverted aside. In the Romans' defense and fighting techniques against the barbarians were well practiced and provided significant safety. After all, when the barbarians were still only bringing their swords, they, by ducking under their hands and raising up their shields, and then slouching and ducking, made their blows useless and futile, because they were directed too high. They themselves, holding their swords straight, struck their enemies in the groin, pierced their sides, and struck their internal organs with blows to the chest. And those who saw these parts of their bodies protected, they cut the tendons under their knees or ankles and threw them to the ground, gnashing their teeth, biting their shields, and uttering a roar like wild beasts. The most important element of the description is the low stance of Roman warriors. Crouching down, the warrior is almost completely hidden behind a large growth shield, on which he takes powerful chopping blows of the Gaulish sword. For this purpose, as Polybius tells us, the upper and lower edge of the Roman shield was padded with iron. Hiding behind the shield and having found a favorable moment, the Roman stabbed his opponent with the tip of the sword. The blow was delivered from the bottom up, targeting the chest, sides and abdomen, which the Gauls were not protected by armor. Roman battle techniques and military equipment. Roman legionaries at this time wore chain mail with additional reinforcements of shoulder pads. The head of the warrior was protected by a high dome-shaped helmet with a wide nassatilnic and large cheekpieces, almost completely covering the face. At the beginning of the 1st century, the dome of the helmet acquired a more rounded shape. In front of the frontal part it began to be decorated with embossed eyebrows and a narrow, protruding forward visor. The back of the helmet increased in size, and the rear part of the dome was equipped with several stiffening ribs. The cheek pads were also enlarged and acquired wide side margins, allowing to cover the upper part of the neck. In the lower part of the rim of the helmet began to make a semicircular cutout for the ears, from above closed by a wide curved plate. Obviously, the appearance of the visor and relief eyebrows in the frontal part of the dome, wide cheekpieces and ears was to increase the protective function of the helmet and to protect the head and upper part of the shoulders of the warrior from sword blows. However, why did the Romans use such a complex design of the helmet shape, and not simply equip their helmets with wide fields, as armorers in the Hellenistic East had done before them? The answer is that this helmet shape was required by the Roman way of fighting. A helmet of this shape is designed to protect a fighter accustomed to fighting bent over, in a lower stance. Such a fighter must look up from below and defend himself against blows to the head, which, sliding down the helmet, may strike him in the face or in the shoulders and upper back. This is a tactic of smaller fighters stabbing their taller opponents in the stomach in combat. In this tactic, the deep back of the helmet should have limited the possibility of head tilt, and the wide visor at eye level would have limited visibility. The changes in Roman military equipment that took place during the second half of the 1st and early 2nd centuries were inevitably reflected in the technique of combat. The Roman legionary of this time, whose appearance is known primarily from reliefs of Trajan's column, is clad in a set plate armor, protected by a rectangular shield. His sword has a much longer blade with a short point and is therefore better suited for a chopping blow than for a stabbing blow. Trajan's legionaries in combat with their enemies had to use a much straighter stance with the body resting on widely spaced legs. The warrior stood with his left shoulder forward, with his shield in his left hand lowered down to protect him from the blows aimed at him. The center of gravity was shifted to the left foot, which was protected by the greaves. In this characteristic pose, Roman legionaries are depicted on reliefs of Trajan's and Marcus Aurelius' columns, as well as other victory monuments. In one of the reliefs of the Trajan trophy from Damocles, we see a Roman warrior using his shield to strike his opponent. To this end, he rests his shoulder on its plane, then takes a quick step forward and collapses on his enemy with his whole body weight, seeking to topple him to the ground or throw him off balance. When the enemy, stunned by the blow, opens up, the Roman gives him a jab with the point of the sword in the left side. Thus, according to the description, then pushing away enemies with a shield, then piercing them with a blade, Roman soldiers acted on the battlefield. Later, the same fighting technique was described by Ammianus Marcellinus, also mentioning its gladiatorial origin.